make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. If we lost the dollar as the world currency, I think that would be the equivalent of losing a war. That would make us a third world country.
US President Donald Trump returned to the White House on the back of his commitment to make America great again, revive American manufacturing, punish foreign competitors, and establish the US dominance in global trade. To achieve this, Trump launched the most aggressive tariff regime in modern history.
I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them. Very simple.
But what if Trump's tariff tremors actually rock the very plan designed to make America stronger, and end up weakening its greatest weapon? In this episode of HT In Depth, we decode how Trump's economic war on the world could backfire, triggering the one shift that American leaders have long feared: the erosion of the dollar's global dominance. On April 2, 2025, Trump unveiled a new tariff regime that stunned both allies and adversaries. His administration announced a universal 10% tariff on all imports, covering every product entering the United States from anywhere in the world. Countries long considered America's allies, like Canada, Mexico, Germany, Japan, and even South Korea, were hit.
It's our declaration of economic independence. For years, hardworking American citizens were forced to sit on the sidelines as other nations got rich and powerful, much of it at our expense. But now it's our turn to prosper, and in so doing, use trillions and trillions of dollars to reduce our taxes and pay down our national debt. This will be indeed the golden age of America.
However, critics argue that these tariffs risk isolating the US from its trade partners, driving them to bypass the American financial systems entirely.
The global trade as well as the global trade rules at this juncture are in a complete chaos, no doubt about it. But from this churning, there could be a possibility of new rules emerging. Now, what could be the contours of these rules which might emerge will depend on whether the countries join hands collectively, they decide to restore rule of law at the WTO, or the second possibility, whether they will not join hands, they will negotiate individually with US, which will only fuel US to continue to increase its demands on these countries. If the latter were to happen, then I am afraid we would be moving, or we would have completely moved from a rules-based international trading regime to a power-based international trading regime, which will not be to the advantage of countries like India and a large number of developing countries.
To understand the impact of these tariffs, it's essential to recognize the US dollar's global role. The dollar isn't just America's currency, it's the backbone of the global financial system. Since World War II, the US dollar has been the king of currencies. Central banks stockpile it. Over 80% of international trade, including commodities like oil and gold, are priced in dollars. This dominance allows the US to borrow money at cheap interest rates, run persistent deficits, and enforce sanctions that can cripple foreign economies. But that crown seems to be slipping.
So far the US dollar has been, extremely key to the international transactions. The US dollar has been, the currency of international trade. If you look into 88% of the world transactions are in US dollar. US dollar has been a currency for investment. US dollar, the Fed bonds have been extremely popular across. So all these things, but it has also made something that when currency is being used, when dollar is used as a weapon, to terrorize other countries, or weapon, which are used in wars to paralyze economies of the other country. I think it has compelled a few years back to think for some alternate currency and an alternating payment system. As you have seen that the 2 years before, when the war of Russia Ukraine broke, then the Russian currency, despite of having their dollars, restrictions were made on Russia, restrictions were made on their assets, restrictions were made on the SWIFT system. So I think it has given rise to the growing thinking among the non-dollar countries to bring out some alternative currency.
The new tariffs are pushing countries not just to retaliate with their own trade restrictions, but also to bypass the US dollar entirely. China, for instance, has accelerated efforts to internationalize the yuan. According to data from the People's Bank of China, in early 2023, 19% of China's cross-border trade was settled in yuan. This has risen to over 36% by the first quarter of 2025. In fact, Russia and China now settle the majority of their bilateral trade in rubles and yuan. In April 2025, India and Russia completed a major $12 billion oil transaction using rupees and rubles, completely avoiding the dollar. Saudi Arabia, a traditional US ally, has started accepting yuan and euros for oil sales. Even the European Union increased trade settlements in euros through alternatives to the SWIFT remittance system. This shift isn't just political. It's becoming systemic. New financial infrastructures are emerging, with China's cross-border interbank payment system, Russia's SPFS, and digital currencies backed by central banks, all designed to operate outside the control of the dollar. The numbers are clear and concerning for US policymakers. According to the IMF's COFA database, the US dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves dropped from 71% in 2000 to 57.8% by the end of 2024. At the same time, the Chinese yuan's share tripled over the last 5 years, and the euro has regained lost ground, particularly in trade between Europe and Asia. SWIFT data shows that non-dollar transactions reached a historic high in early 2025, with over 38% of global payments conducted in currencies other than the dollar. The ASEAN bloc, which includes countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, reported a 40% rise in local currency settlements for intra-regional trade, up from 24% just 2 years earlier. This is a direct response to increasing US tariffs and perceived financial instability in dollar-based systems. But why does this matter so much? Well, the answer lies in the power of the dollar. The dollar is not just a currency, it's a pillar of American influence. If fewer countries use the dollar, the United States loses leverage. Sanctions lose their sting. Borrowing becomes more expensive. And the US economic power starts to erode. The US currently enjoys what economists call the exorbitant privilege, the ability to borrow in its own currency at low interest rates. A weaker dollar would raise borrowing costs for the US government, exacerbating its $35 trillion debt burden. Even a 1% increase in interest rates could add $350 billion annually to debt servicing costs, straining fiscal stability. Higher rates would also ripple through consumer loans and mortgages, stifling economic activity. JP Morgan warns that de-dollarization could trigger upward pressure on real yields and undercut US equity markets. Trump's tariffs have also amplified recession fears. JP Morgan estimates a 60% chance of a global recession by late 2025, while Moody's Analytics raised its US recession probability to 40%. Tariffs disrupt supply chains, inflate manufacturing costs, and provoke retaliatory measures. Higher import costs are already squeezing US consumers, with the Tax Foundation estimating an additional $2,100 annual burden per household. Stagflation, a toxic mix of stagnant growth and inflation, is now a near certainty, as per experts. The S&P 500 sharp decline and the dollar's 6% drop against major currencies in 2025 reflect eroding confidence. Moreover, the loss of dollar's dominance would have ripple effects on geopolitical power. The US could struggle to enforce foreign policy through financial tools. Countries may become bolder in defying US interests, knowing they are no longer as exposed to Washington's economic threats. Economists and global institutions are now sounding the alarm. Nouriel Roubini, professor at NYU and a longtime critic of US fiscal policy, wrote in March 2025, "Trump's tariffs are not just deglobalizing trade, they are actively de-dollarizing the global economy." The World Bank, in its latest global outlook, warned that persistent US protectionism could undermine the dollar's role as a settlement and reserve currency faster than previously expected. Even traditionally pro-US institutions like the Bank of England have begun adjusting their foreign reserve strategy, reducing dollar exposure and diversifying into gold, euros, and the Chinese yuan.
But one thing is, it should be noted, which is that the dollar today is not the world's sole reserve currency because of an international agreement or international pact or an international treaty. The dollar has come to be the world's dominant reserve currency by virtue of the strength of the American economy, the depth and resilience of American financial markets, the credibility of American institutions of governance, and America providing security cover to a large number of allies around the world. It is because of those reasons that the dollar has come to become the world's reserve currency. But if those reasons start eroding, if American institutions of governance are not credible, if America is no longer a reliable ally, if America does not maintain the dollar's strength, it's very unclear that the dollar will prevail as the world's reserve currency.
The path to reversing this trend is narrow but still possible. Experts say the US must re-engage with the world on economic terms. This means rethinking unilateral tariffs, strengthening trade alliances, and restoring trust in the dollar-based financial system. Domestic reforms are also key. Stable fiscal policies, debt control, and long-term investment in productivity and innovation are essential if the US wants to maintain the dollar's appeal. But none of this will work if the US continues to weaponize trade and finance at the same time. As more countries grow tired of being subject to American economic pressure, they will continue building alternative systems that no longer need the US dollar. Once the cornerstone of global trade and diplomacy, the dollar now faces a major threat, not from outside forces alone, but from within. The more the US uses tariffs to wall itself off from the world, the faster the world learns to live without the dollar. And once that shift becomes permanent, the balance of global power may never be the same again. Hence, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Trump's tariffs aren't just a tax on imports. They're a tax on America's financial leverage worldwide.